All right, I've been anxious for this conversation for quite a while. A frequent guest on the show is Maricopa County Sheriff Paul Penzone. Sheriff, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
I got to tell you, I was as surprised as anyone when you decided that you weren't going to run for a third term. And let's start with that decision. What went into that decision? That had to be a lengthy one for you. You've been in law enforcement for how many years?
1988.
So that's quite a while.
A little long in the tooth and gray in the hair.
Well, you're not gray in the hair, but that's.
Well, let's not forget my wife's a hairstylist.
That's true.
Salon,
that is true.
Can hide them from the best.
What went into that decision?
Well, I think that when you're an elected official, you should always be evaluating prior to an election cycle whether it's right for you, whether it's right for the community. The idea of elected officials staying in perpetuity is nonsense. So for me, it's kind of started with. Do I feel like what I've done has been productive for the organization, for the community in that time frame? And then I take a look at it and I say professionally, what does the next term look like? Do I feel like there are things that can be accomplished? Do I feel like, and in my situation, I think it's unique because I'm pushing up against federal court oversight. What can I accomplish in that time frame that moves the meter even further forward? And even though there were things that I felt really passionate about that I thought we could have, then I have to ask myself, can I go into a third term and really be as committed as I was in the first? Am I going to be as driven and as positive as I should be for the community's sake? Because it's in for a penny and for a pound. It can't be toe in the water. You have to give this community 110% of your heart. So that was the professional side of the ledger. The personal side is, I'm not a young man. I'm coming up quickly on, I'm past the midway of my 50s, we'll say. And I have a family I love dearly. And I looked at it and I said, well, are there opportunities out there that would be new for me and that would be beneficial just not only personally because I want to be purpose-driven, but even financially because, quite frankly, the sheriff job doesn't pay so great. So all those elements kind of went into consideration, and I just kind of got to the point I said, you know what, maybe it's time for me to just put a button on this, be grateful for this opportunity because it's been exceptional, but to do some things for myself and for my family while opening the door for others to come in as sheriff and make more improvements. Well,
that's another piece of it is the who will be next. I'm sure you've been approached by people that are going to run for the office or want to run for the office. Is there a possibility that you would endorse a candidate, or are you going to stay out of the way and not do that? I'm not asking you to do that now, but if the right person came along.
You're interested? Is that what you're telling me, Mike?
Yeah. Could you see me in law
Absolutely.
enforcement?
Absolutely.
I'll tell you what, if I get your endorsement, I'll run.
Oh, yeah? All right. We'll negotiate that. I would like to be really helpful for a candidate that I believe in, no different than any other office. I made this commitment to not endorse because I feel like it was the right thing for me as well as to represent this office, to get away from the politics. So I think it's unlikely that I would come out publicly and endorse anybody, but absolutely behind the scenes, I would want to be helpful to the candidate that's the right one. Not the one that I think is going to do what I did, the one who's going to make it even better in new and unique ways.
Have you had any second thoughts? I mean, you've made this decision, but now you're still going to be in the office until January. January's approaching very quickly. Was there ever a time when you sat down with your wife and thought, I'm not sure I want to leave this career yet?
No, and it's kind of interesting because even when I left Phoenix PD and I was a silent witness and I really enjoyed that job, once I make up my mind, I try not to look back. You can't really thrive and succeed going forward if you're regretting anything from behind you. So I've had so much incredible opportunity in this position as sheriff that I never expected. And people have, I heard Mr. Garagiola talking earlier about how kind everybody had been to him. The same, like I announced and then I worked the World Series, coincidentally, Diamondbacks. And people were stopping me every 3 or 4 feet to say thank you, want to take a picture. And again, I try not to get intoxicated on it because you face as much criticism as you do love. And you can't be broken when somebody criticizes and you can't think too much of yourself when they're giving you a compliment. But it was really humbling. So I feel like I'm leaving at the right time. More could have been done, but where I'm going is also extremely exciting, and I'll be really engaged in giving back to the community.
I want to get into the consent decree in a few moments and the government oversight, but before we get to that part of it, what about accomplishments? When you look back at your time as the Maricopa County Sheriff, are there things that you are going to be a legacy in your mind and accomplishments in your mind? Maybe people don't realize, but to you they were significant and you're proud of them?
Yeah, and I would tell you what matters most to me is what you can't maybe see, feel, or touch. And that is I've had employees come up to me and express gratitude saying that they felt historically, and I hate to act as though I'm giving myself credit for it, but the view of the organization in the past was not a good one. And everybody who wore the tan uniform or represented the office carried that burden. of criticism of this demonization because you guys are racially profiling, you're abusing people, you're taking your authority and you're excessive with it. And now they express that they have pride in the organization, that they feel like they've been treated with respect and therefore the community now respects them. So I would hope that my legacy, whether my name's attached to it or not, is that the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office at this time in place is seen as one that is professional and ethical and does what's best for the community's interests, and that the men and women in the organization represent all those values.
What about the other side of it, the other ones that were supporters of the policies of the previous sheriff? Do you believe you've been able to satisfy them to a certain degree that you are still going to enforce the laws in Maricopa County?
You threw me off because at first I thought you were talking about employees. So you're talking about
both.
I feel like in many ways people choose their opinion the same way they choose their morale, the same way they choose their attitude. If you want to go to work every day with a bad attitude and complain about what's not being done for you versus what you're doing for others, then I can't turn that corner for you. But I do believe that, and I hear this. I primarily hear this from your faction. I'll say with respect. Conservative Republicans. One guy came up and he goes, "Listen, when you got elected, I wasn't happy. I didn't like you. But you know what?" And I'm trying to think how he said it exactly. He goes, "You didn't upset me. You didn't make me mad," or something. Like it was like a backhand compliment. It's pretty funny, right?
As close as it's going to get.
You know what that told me? That told me that no matter where you are on the spectrum, you knew what to expect of me, and hopefully you felt that it was going to be fair and just, that it was not politically driven. And I do think that I changed hearts and minds in a lot of people who expected me to fail in that space, and I'd like to think that I didn't.
You had to face some issues with the introduction of drugs into the facilities, into the jails, and you did so pretty outward. I mean, you were very out in the open about it, and what you were doing about testing and making sure that people were not bringing in, whether it was employees or inmates bringing things in. How is that going?
It's improved. It's improved dramatically, but it's still a reflection of how significant the problem is in society. We've seen more suicides, I think, in the last year than maybe in our history. And I'm not talking just in the jail. I mean, just in the United States in general. The drug overdose is this problem that we have. So the jail system is always a reflection of society in general, just more magnified and at a higher volume. So at the end of the day, we have to look at ourselves as people and ask what we're going to do to curb this problem of addiction and mental illness, because it is breaking up families and taking lives of those that we love. So it's an us problem. But I'm happy with what the organization's done to try to mitigate it.
All right, in studio with us is Maricopa County Sheriff Paul Penzone. I have been very sensitive to the idea of the city of Phoenix entering into a consent decree with the DOJ. I've used the sheriff's office. My opinion's not yours. I've used the sheriff's office and the amount of money we as taxpayers have spent as a warning to what Phoenix may be getting itself into. Can you describe, first, let's start off with what it was like when you won the job. You know, the people voted for you. You got a whole brand new command staff in there, and then you found yourself with parts of your agency under control of the federal government. What was that like?
Well, even before we get there, I'm going to just speak as direct as I can to tell you that if Phoenix, in my opinion, if Phoenix PD goes under a consent decree, our community will be so adversely impacted beyond anything in the nation as it relates to hamstringing the two largest police agencies in our community, and it will be to the benefit of crime. Public safety will pay the not just financial debt, not just the literal debt, but the debt of trying to meet those needs while caring for the community's best interest when it comes to crime. We will be in dire straits. And I know that sounds like doomsday, but I am telling you that I've seen the impact on our organization, how the resources pulled from the organization for oversight to the detriment of being out there to respond for calls for service, investigate crimes, all the things that are necessary. If they go under with us, it is going to be tough sled in Phoenix, greater Phoenix Metro. What was it like? Initially, it was kind of like I became the sheriff and I had this naive ideal that the people elected me. I'm going to be the agent of change. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to have the chance to really lead this organization back on track, and that the monitors may be present, and it may have been for justifiable reasons, but that the reins will be put in my hands a little bit more than they would be. And at first, they make you think that. But I'll tell you, there have been times when I've been in the courtroom where I've dealt with the monitors, and I felt like you, as sons of, you are treating me as though I'm the one responsible for these atrocities, and you've never truly given me the chance to lead the organization, because at every turn, it just seems to me that there are underlying influences that impede your ability to get out of the dark into the light. And like a monitoring team, the majority of which by far aren't even from this community, getting paid an outrageous amount of money to do this oversight, there are some conflicts of interest. There are some elements that really don't lead to what is best for the people that we serve.
I saw a bill for the month of July of over $200,000. And then it was also reported in the news report that the monitors haven't even been in Maricopa County since in 3 years because of COVID and some other things. So we're paying for office space, $97,000, millions of dollars every year to the taxpayers.
I'm laughing because it's not funny. I'm laughing at, like with pain. Yeah, they hadn't been. They just came recently, but they hadn't been in town since prior to COVID or just after COVID. Excuse me. And I think, like, laughingly, they ran a town hall once where they took the town halls back from me unjustifiably, and I stuck around for an hour and a half, and then I left because I wasn't a participant. And I went in the courtroom and got chewed up and spit out. And I couldn't believe when I looked back how ridiculous it was, because here these guys haven't had a town hall in 3 years. They criticized me for leaving one. We pay for the Lours building, not building, but the top floor for them to occupy. They occupy it 4 days every quarter, yet the county pays for it since inception, and they paid for it that entire 3 years. There are just too many financial elements. But let's get to the meat and potatoes. The meat and potatoes is this. Show me a formula anywhere in the nation where the Department of Justice came in to oversee a police agency, and at the conclusion, the cost of the community was to the benefit of the long-term sustainability. There's just not a model because it doesn't work. So they really need to go back to the drawing table and say, what is the best way to intervene and then to rebuild a law enforcement agency in a community where it's failing?
Am I wrong in that when it's entered into a consent decree, that the agency has no recourse? You can't go back to the court and petition to get out. That is it at the pleasure of the monitor to say you're in good standing and now you can have your agency back? Well,
I'm not as familiar with consent decrees because ours are orders. So the judge has final say on everything, and the monitor is really the one who has the direct line to the judge. So it's his words that are the most impactful by far. In a consent decree, I think you have a little bit more leverage when it comes to negotiations. But at the end of the day, we've seen. I think that Oakland has a consent decree, and it's 20 years, and they've gone through, I think, 13 or 14 police chiefs in that time frame. So literally, you're making the argument that all of those police chiefs, as law enforcement professionals, are less equipped to turn an organization around than a monitor who comes into town 4 days every quarter. And although they're looking at data and they're reviewing documents in between those time frames, at the end of the day, they show up and they act as though they know the organization inside and out. They don't know the community's issues. They don't know the crime. Like, let's just take a look at MCSO. In the last 6 years, we've had COVID, BLM protests, election fraud issues that have been nonstop. We've had the fentanyl problem. So I've dedicated resources to all different unique spaces. And we've seen a depreciation in our work staff by about 25% since prior to COVID. So I'm doing more with less. And at the same time, our organization was held in contempt because we can't keep up with 1,200 internal investigations a year. That is the result of the orders being written so aggressively that we have to investigate everything. So I have 140 people, I think it is, assigned to court oversight. I have 110 assigned to general crimes, high-profile investigations. There's a disparity in it. And what's not given consideration is the needs of the community and the impact that the organization is dealing with because of these other factors.
So then in your mind, speaking before we even finish with Phoenix, what does that say about your agency and the next person that's going to be elected to this position? Because they're going to walk into the exact same situation. What do you say to the next person that takes the job?
It's still the best job in town, in spite of that, because I tell the men and women, like, listen, the obstacle may be in your way, go around it, over it, through it, whatever you have to do. But you know why? Because there's somebody out in the community that needs you. There's somebody out there who is suffering in some way because they're being victimized. That's far more significant than us dealing with monitors. But I will say this, the men and women in MCSO are phenomenal. Those that are paying the debt weren't those that incurred the debt. And they come to work and do a great job, whether it's in the field, whether it's in the jails, or whether it's in the buildings, doing the administrative stuff. And I'm grateful for them because in spite of this nonsense, they still work to overcome. But it's unfair. I'm just going to call it like it is. It's unfair to them because they deserve the right to serve the community in the manner they signed up for. So being the sheriff is still pretty darn cool. Whoever pursues this office, I just ask that you commit to the men and women first and foremost, and they'll deliver on your behalf. As far as Phoenix PD, yeah, were there issues that need to be overcome? Absolutely. But I do believe that our community and those that are elected in other offices can be the tip of the spear to address that. The Department of Justice attorneys from D.C. or wherever have no skill set in that space.
So let's talk about the numbers, the cost.
Yeah.
What have I, as a Maricopa County taxpayer, and anybody else listening, what have we spent on this oversight so far?
So the monitors, I think that they're billing you uniquely, which is, whether it's staying in a hotel or eating a meal or whatever it is they bill for, that's like close to 30 million, somewhere between 27 and 30 million. The total cost for the oversight is over $250 million. And if you just put that in the context and say, what could we have done for education or what could we have done for the organization in different ways? Some of those dollars spent were necessary to improve things, but not the whole tab. It is... The overseers have no oversight. We need to do a better job of having a review team that looks at every bill from the community and says to the judge, this is acceptable, this is not. And I don't believe that the court should be the final say on using taxpayer dollars.
Maricopa County Sheriff Paul Penzone is joining us. So then let me ask this about the oversight. The other thing I'm hearing is that when the DOJ is investigating, you are not necessarily getting real-time information. If they say, we see an issue here, you're not getting details of how they came to that conclusion where you're not able to address it specifically, or is that only in the investigation phase? Are you getting real feedback from them now and saying all of this specifically needs to be fixed?
Well, ours, because we're on the backside of the 8 ball. So everything that we get is every 3 months, on our scorecards. They have interaction between those timeframes, but I do not believe that the monitoring team, and I don't believe the Department of Justice when they do these investigations, that they really work in this kind of good faith space where they're treating you as a colleague to work through the problem. They're treating you like you are a criminal who's done something wrong, and they're putting their investigation together. Then they're going to tell you what they're going to do to you because of it. And I don't think that's in the best interest of the community. I think that if you have the right people in place, they're working side by side with you for the greater benefit of the community, not to kind of put this notch in their gun belt to say, okay, now we've got another police agency under oversight, therefore the world's a better place. That's not the way that we get through this for the betterment of the community. The way we get through it is by improving law enforcement, by working together, not holding something over our head that is so ridiculous to overcome. Just, if every day you had to take a test and you have to get 94% on that test for 3 years straight, and if you get 93%, the clock starts over, that's just unrealistic. And that's kind of the space that we exist in.
Sheriff, I appreciate the time, and I appreciate your candor on the consent decree that may be coming to the city of Phoenix. I think it's great insight, and I hope we get to talk to you again before you leave the office. I'd love to be able to kind of wrap things up with you one more time.
I'd love to, Mike, because I prefer to be a positive guy, so I hope I'm not sounding like I'm whining about this, but I'll tell you, I have no kind words to share when it comes to the monitoring team or process. So when I come back, we're going to talk about some positive things. I'd rather leave on that note.
That sounds great. That's Maricopa County Sheriff Paul Penzone. We'll be right back.